So last week, the U.S. sent that letter urging Israel to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza and heed international law. In that time, the Israeli military has targeted a child and then bombed him and the people trying to help him. Band-Aid organizations repeatedly bombed a refugee camp, attacked the remaining hospitals in northern Gaza, killed 4 engineers fixing water systems, rounded up people, tied them, blindfolded them, bombed an UNRWA shelter, and killed a 59-year-old woman as she harvested olives on her land in the West Bank. What does it mean if the Israeli government responds to U.S. requests to follow international law by committing possible violations of international law?
So first, Prem, I just want to be very clear that as it relates to the specifics of some of these operations, I will let the government of Israel and the IDF speak to that. The point of the letter also was to provide a timeline in which we wanted to see certain factors as it relates to the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza and addressing humanitarian concerns addressed. The timeline for that we are not at the end of that process, and so I am certainly not going to speculate or draw conclusions or assessments on that when we are still within that time frame. What I can say unequivocally is that we want to see the humanitarian situation in Gaza addressed. We, as Matt spoke about last week, we saw a couple of benchmarks move forward, specifically the opening of some crossings. That is, of course, a positive step in the right direction. Not at all conclusive, and certainly not at all satisfactory to a lot of the things that we laid out in the letter. There was also a couple of other things that we wanted to see, particularly as it relates to how evacuations are undertook and a couple of other efforts. That work certainly still remains, and certainly there is still a lot of work that needs to be done as it relates to addressing the humanitarian situation. And I expect these are some of the specific things I expect the Secretary to raise. And on top of that, we have been unequivocal that as these operations are conducted, that every possible effort needs to be taken to minimize impacts on civilians and civilian infrastructure. And if you'll just allow me to address your last point about the woman who is harvesting olives in the West Bank, these reports are incredibly concerning. We understand that the IDF has taken some additional initial steps, that the officer was suspended. The IDF has released a statement that an investigation has been opened by the military police. The commander has been suspended from her position until this investigation concludes. And our expectation is that Israel investigate this thoroughly, swiftly, transparently, and it seeks accountability in this incident as well. And I will just note that it is not lost on us that the annual olive harvest is major economic activity to Palestinian people and to the Palestinian economy, and we believe that Palestinians need to have access to their land to conduct these kinds of harvests when appropriate.
So that reminds me, after the killing of Aishnor Egi about a month and a half, 2 months ago, the department mentioned how, this shows that it seems that the Israeli military needs to really consider and reconsider its rules of engagement. What does it say that not only, I know you mentioned that there's been accountability for the soldier, allegedly, who killed the 59-year-old woman, but there's specifically this case of a child being targeted, and as he calls for help, as people descend upon him to help him, they get bombed. I know you said you won't comment on all of these operations, but is that an operation? That just seems like a killing.
I'm not going to, again, speak to these incidents in specificity, but I can say, Prem, that what we had said before, it continues to be the case, and it continues to be that we want to see some changes when it comes to military engagement and the rules of engagement, particularly as it relates to the West Bank. That continues to be something that we want to see.
Okay, and then finally, just a finer point. The department last week said the reason the U.S. gave Israel 30 days to improve the situation in Gaza was to give them enough time to cure the problem. You just said that this letter was also about affirming existing U.S. policy. So what exactly happens if the Israeli government doesn't heed U.S. policy? 23 days from now, if these bombings continue, these capturings, these killings continue, as they have for the past 380 days, what specifically will the U.S. do?
So I'm not gonna speculate on what may or may not happen, Prem. I can say, and you heard Matt say this last week as well, we of course will appropriately enforce what U.S. law is. We are bound by the laws that govern our government and of course govern the security relationships that we have with any particular country. I'm not gonna speculate what that process is. There is still quite some time before we're at that point.
Why hasn't
We
it been
hope that
enforced
we
now?
want to. We hope that we don't have to get there.
Why?
Our hope is that we see some effective remediation in efforts surrounding humanitarian access and humanitarian aid, and we hope that we don't have to get to that point. So I will continue to let that process play out. I know that this is something that is important to the Secretary, and he'll be raising it with counterparts on this trip.
Why hasn't it
In
been
the
enforced
back.
up to this point?
Good.
You mentioned earlier that